Lukas de Gruyl. Well, hello. So, as I said, my name is Lukas de Gruyl, but it's actually pronounced de Gruyl, because I'm a first-generation American. My father was born in Holland in 1953, and he lived there until he was 8, and in 1961, he came with his parents and his 3 brothers from Amsterdam to Ellis Island, and it took them 2 weeks to cross the ocean on a boat, and everything they owned was packed in this shipping container on board. And so, when they arrived at Ellis Island, as they are wont to do there, they changed de Gruyl, which they could not pronounce, to something more American, like de Gruyl. And it stuck. So that's what it is now. So my father was 8 when he came here, but you'd never be able to tell that he wasn't born in America. In fact, he wasn't an American citizen until he was 40, and I was about 13. So being Dutch has always been a huge part of my cultural upbringing, my life. My grandparents are still very feverishly in love with the land of their birth, and that love was passed on to me. You know, it's you can feel the bloodline stretching back generation over generation. And so things were passed to me, you know, as an American-born Dutchman, love of things like windmills and dikes and licorice, and a fervent hatred of Germans. So my Dutch blood burns fiercely white hot. Well, at least it used to. In 2009, I met my amazing wife. We're from the same small town in West Virginia, but ironically we had never met before because we're about 4 years different in age. And we fell madly and quickly in love. And that's probably why I didn't notice the fatigue, the strange pains in strange places all over my body, weight loss. So we were married in May of 2010, and then in August of 2010 we were at a cousin's wedding in Memphis, and I just found myself completely exhausted. I just couldn't even get out of the bed. I really didn't feel like doing much, but after much, shall we say, convincing from my wife, I stumbled out of bed into the bathroom to try and get ready. But I wasn't ready for what I found there. My left armpit was swollen, and it was sticking out about 2 inches from where it should, and I could feel some hard lymph nodes. I was a little taken aback, but I felt like shit, so I figured I was just sick. And then the next day after the wedding, I was back in the shower, and my left testicle was swollen to twice its normal size, and I knew something was seriously wrong. So we hurried home, and the next day I was in my doctor's office the very first thing in the morning. So he examined me, and while agreeing that something was wrong, he said, you know, you're a young, healthy man. It's probably just some bug. He asked if I had had any diarrhea or stomach upset lately, and indeed I had. So he said it's probably just nothing, and he told me to go home. Gave me a prescription for the pain, and that was it. And so I was walking out the door, and I felt somebody tap me on the shoulder from behind. And I turn around, and it's my doctor. And he has an order in his hand. And he quickly pushes it into my hand and says, I wrote you an order for an x-ray, just in case, but I really want you to go do it right now. They're waiting for you. So just go ahead and go now. And I was on my lunch break from work, so I did. And then I went back to work. About 2 hours later, the phone rang, and it was my doctor. He'd seen something extremely concerning on the x-ray, some spots. And I I was told that I needed to go have a CT scan as soon as possible, immediately. And in fact, he had already set that up at another hospital, and they too were waiting for me. So I did. And then about 2 agonizing weeks later, the doctor was on the phone again, and he diagnosed me with stage 4X Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that is blood cancer, for those of you that don't know. And it wasn't 4B, which means a tremendous disease burden, with what they call B symptoms, which is night sweats, weight loss, jaundice sometimes. But 4X, meaning that not only did I have tumors all over my entire body, but it was in my bone marrow also. I had over 40 tumors in my body. I had them in my neck, in my chest, abdomen, my groin. I had them on my heart, in my lungs, in my spleen, my liver, my pancreas, and in my spine. And they didn't show me that PET scan then. They didn't show me for about a year. And honestly, I don't know if you know about a PET scan, but it lights up where there's cancer activity. And you know, with 40 tumors, I would have looked like a Christmas tree, with lights strung across. So, needless to say, my wife and I, we were shocked. We'd only been married a few short months. I was a healthy guy. I was 29 years old. I ate well. I exercised regularly. I was a certified personal trainer. I mean, how the fuck could this happen to me? And we were really scared. Really scared. But the doctors were positive. They said if you have to get cancer, you want to get Hodgkin's lymphoma. About 90% of people are cured with first-line chemotherapy, and they never have to think about it again. And I was not one of those 90%. So about, halfway through the first 6 months of chemo, I was clean. There was no evidence of disease, nowhere at all. So we celebrated a little bit early. But by the time I had finished the 6-month treatment, I developed a resistance and it had come back. So I had a 3-centimeter node in my liver. So after fine needle aspiration, which is a fine needle sounds like it's really small, but it's actually about this long. So they stuck that into my liver and determined that yes, it was Hodgkin's, and I did need more chemotherapy. So it was time for second-line chemo. But the catch this time was that I had to have a bone marrow transplant to make sure that it would stick. So instead of my first chemo, which I showed up every other Monday for 4 hours, this chemo I had to check into the hospital, and it was 4 days long. So I would get chemo pumped into me for 4 days, and then I would have 3 weeks off. And then 4 more days of chemo, 3 weeks off. 4 more days of chemo, 3 weeks off. So that wasn't fun, but it did work. Did get me into a remission. So it was time for the bone marrow transplant. Now, an autologous, or an auto for short, transplant, isn't really a transplant at all, because you receive your own stem cells back. Basically what they do is, once you achieve a remission and there's no evidence of disease in your body, they inject you with these drugs called Neulasta or Neupogen. Those are brand names. But they stimulate your bone marrow to create millions and millions and millions of extra stem cells, and they just freely float around in your blood. And then you have another surgery to implant a line for access. So they implant a line in your chest, and basically they cut a hole in your chest, and the line sticks out kind of like a dongle, for your iPad connection or something to your computer, and there's an in and an out tube for blood to circulate. And then it goes underneath the skin. And then so it follows underneath the skin above your muscles, so you can feel this little tube under your skin if you want. And it goes all the way up to your neck, and then they puncture your jugular vein, put the line into your vein, and turn it down, and then put the line straight into the center of your heart. And then they hook you up to a pheresis machine. So you have these millions and millions and millions of stem cells floating around in your blood. They hook you up to a pheresis machine, and each day they filter the entire contents of your circulatory system about 2 to 3 times through this machine. And depending on how many stem cells your body has been able to create after all the treatment, they would like to collect about 4 to 5 million stem cells. And for me, that took about 4 days being hooked up to this machine. And then they freeze them. And then it's time for what they call high-intensity chemotherapy. And personally, I call it hell. This isn't what you think of as regular chemotherapy. They give you so much chemotherapy in the hopes of eradicating every single cancer cell in your entire body that it's actually a fatal dose of the drug. It totally kills your bone marrow, so you can no longer make blood at all. And so in order to save your life, they give you back your own stem cells. If they didn't, you would die. So being stem cells, they just give them to you through that little dongle, hook you up like an IV, and being stem cells, they travel throughout your body, and they know just where to go. So they go into your bones, they implant inside your bones, they become spongy bone marrow, and they begin producing blood. It's pretty amazing. And so that saves your life. Most of the time. About 1 in 100 times, they don't implant, and that is fatal. And even so, there's about a week between when you get the chemotherapy and when they implant these stem cells that you cannot make blood. So I received several blood transfusions in order to keep me alive, so I could start making my own blood again. I received red blood cells so that my blood could carry oxygen to my muscles, my brain, my organs. I received platelets because platelets clot blood. A normal platelet level is about 135 on the low side of the range. My platelet level was 10. So I could bleed to death brushing my teeth, which I was not allowed to do. I was not allowed to brush my teeth. No shaving, obviously. No knives. Wasn't allowed to use a knife to eat my food. And my white blood cell count was terribly low, meaning my immune system was basically non-existent. So I had no resistance to disease or infection. So I was in an ICU room for 21 days, I believe. Air sealed. There was no air from outside that came inside. Everybody that came in my room had to wear a mask. They had to scrub in and out. I was not allowed to eat fresh fruits or vegetables. No probiotics, so no yogurt, no aged cheeses. I was injected with IV antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, multiple times every single day. And then eventually, when I was released to outpatient treatment, I had to wear a mask. And I couldn't be around crowds. Couldn't be around cut grass, no flowers, no fun, basically. Not that I felt like having fun, because I didn't. But I did survive the transplant, and I did start to recover slowly. About a year later, I had a routine PET scan, as they do, to make sure your treatments are still working, and they discovered that I'd relapsed again. So I had some nodes in my pancreas and tons of tiny, like sub-millimeter nodules all over my lungs, hundreds of them. Almost too small to test. So it was time for more treatment. There's not much else to do. Luckily for me, A brand new targeted chemotherapy treatment had just been approved by the FDA maybe 6 weeks before I relapsed. And I'm iffy about the luck part of that, because had it not been approved, I probably could have still gotten it through a clinical trial, and as such it probably would have been free because it's an experimental drug. But since it had been approved, I had to pay for it. Or well, my insurance company had to pay for it. And since it was brand new approved, it was quite a price tag. It was a 30-minute infusion. I had it once a month for 14 months, and every time it cost $75,000. And that is not an exaggeration. So 14 treatments at $75,000. So the good news is, though, it really is a miracle drug. It does a lot of things for a lot of people. And it did reduce my disease burden to a point where I could decide on, what my next step would be. There are a lot of clinical trials going on all the time for lots of different cancers. There are thousands of different types of cancers, and every single one is treated a different way. So cancer research and funding is really important. A lot of these trials can be difficult to qualify for. Depending on your past treatment, some of those drugs can disqualify you because they're trying to rule out all variables. Sometimes it's far away. Some of the trials I may have been eligible for were at Baylor University in Texas, so that's pretty cost prohibitive to fly to Texas every other week when your insurance company won't pay travel expenses for experimental treatments, only the ones on the list. So that's pretty much what made my decision to have a second bone marrow transplant. So an auto transplant there's some danger. Like I said, about 1 in 100 people die of transplant-related complications. For an allogeneic transplant, or an allo for short, the chance of transplant-related death is 1 in 5. 1 in 5. So that's pretty terrifying. The chances of a cure were also about 1 in 5. So that was good. But when you look at the big picture, my chances of being alive 5 years after I have this transplant is only 2 in 5. So it's a 3 in 5 chance that I would die in 5 years. So as you can probably guess, people in this situation want to put off this transplant as long as they can. And that was my plan. And then I found out that Medicare doesn't cover this procedure for people with my cancer. I mean, I'd had COBRA up until this point, which had been great. I had a single charge disputed in $2.5 million worth of care, and we're talking about the $75,000 a dose medicine. But it was running out at the end of the year. So I had a dilemma. I could hope that I maintained the remission that I had achieved with this drug, maybe for a while, years maybe forever. But if I didn't hold the remission and it came back when I only had Medicare, that means I would have to pay for it out of pocket. And that could have meant leaving my wife with a $700,000 medical debt for a treatment that I may not even survive. And there was no way I could do that. When you have cancer, there's not a lot of things that you can control. Pretty much nothing. But this I could control. This thing, so I did. And I decided to have that bone marrow transplant now, instead of putting it off. So on November 13th, 2012, I went into Ohio State University for my bone marrow transplant, my allogeneic transplant. And now this is a real transplant. Now this is somebody else's stem cells. So as you probably know, with an organ transplant, there's always a chance of the person rejecting the organ. If you get a kidney transplant, and your immune system recognizes that as foreign DNA, it's going to try and kill it. So in those cases, they remove the kidney, and that problem is solved temporarily. They still have the kidney problem. But with a bone marrow transplant, you're planting a new immune system in your body. So if that immune system starts rejecting you, you're fucked. There's no going back. So it's really dangerous. It's really risky. I had to turn to the International Bone Marrow Registry in order to find a suitable match for my donor transplant. My full brother was not a match for me. Of all your family members, the best chance you have is a full sibling match, and that's still really low. Only about 20% of the time will your sibling be a match suitable enough for a bone marrow donation. And so we had to turn to the registry. And I, being a European, was lucky enough to have multiple 10 out of 10 options, meaning on a scale of 10 points, 10 matching points, I had multiple donors who met all 10. So I had a choice between good options, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people go ahead with this procedure with a 9 of 10, an 8 of 10, sometimes less. And you know, that honestly, that's suicide. But the people who do that have no choice left. And they're willing to try anything. So I am 20 months out from transplant now. And as far as I know, I am still cancer-free. But you know, I still don't know who saved my life. At first, the bone marrow donation process is anonymous. Though I was told after a year I could find out who my donor was. But I still haven't. And you know, I'm not really sure why. I mean, there are a lot of thoughts that go through your head, you know. I'm not even 2 years out now, you know, what if it doesn't work? You know, you want to put that burden on somebody, and maybe they would feel like you know, their donation wasn't good enough, and it caused your death, or you know, what if they don't like me? Or what if I don't like them? They're now a part of me, literally a part of me. And then you think, why did I even get a donor? You know, so many people I loved, and so many people who were strong and beautiful with my disease, they didn't have the luck that I had, and they passed. And you think, why me? You know, what did I do to deserve this? And what do I do with this gift of life? And honestly, you know, it hasn't been very long that there aren't a lot of answers. And I'm not sure there ever will be, but take it one day at a time. And as I said, the bone marrow donor process, I didn't know much about my donor. But as it turns out, the one thing I did find out is that my donor was German. So, yeah, I laughed. I laughed really hard. It was ironic, you know. A Dutchman was about to be saved through the self-sacrifice of a German. I mean, totally self-sacrificing. My insurance paid for their procedure, their stem cell collection, the plane to charter the frozen bag of blood from Germany to my hospital room within 6 hours. But you know, they didn't receive a dime. Nothing. And not only saved by a German. Once those stem cells implanted in my bones and started making new blood, that blood would be German. And if I leave blood at a crime scene, they'll be looking for a German guy. Or a German woman. I honestly don't even know. I did change blood types. I used to be O positive Dutch, and now I'm AB negative German. It's pretty crazy. So when my father found out, he thought it was funny too. But he didn't tell my grandparents for months. But when they did find out, they too laughed. And really, it was a good source of laughter in a time when it was very sorely needed. So now, I guess I can say my German blood burns white hot. And that's okay with me. And it's okay with my grandparents too. And I guess I just have to look at the silver linings. And, Holland didn't win the World Cup this year, but Germany did.